What's up, y'all? We are back with another edition of DMVR Rams Live. As always, I am your host, Justin Michael. Honestly, I hope everybody's having a better Friday than I am. Found out about 5 minutes before the show that I'm going to have to replace the furnace and air conditioning unit in my house that we bought about 6 months ago. Can't afford that. Not sure how that's going to play out. But we're going to do our best. We're going to try and persevere. We're going to try and push through, get the vibes up. At the very least, we have some fun stuff to talk about. We can focus on CSU football, doing a great job filling some gaps in depth. We'll get into that a little bit later. The Rams have really done a nice job adding some beef to the defensive line in particular. We'll get into kind of, maybe what some final, tinkering here and there could take place just in terms of, some areas maybe the Rams could add some depth. We'll talk about the guys they've added. How an increased investment in recruiting staff and personnel is certainly paying off for CSU, kind of seeing some of those immediate returns there. So that's encouraging for the future. Going to start here. We're going to have a little bit of fun. It's the middle of summer. Thought we could, do some stuff maybe we don't always do. So we're going to talk about some clutch Rams over the last 20 years. We're also going to get into some of the biggest villains of the Mountain West era. This will certainly have a CSU slant. It's from our perspective. If you are a fan of these other teams, obviously you're going to have a little bit different perspective. But I was watching some hockey last night in preparation for, some Avs commentary, and Jamie Benn on the Dallas Stars is just like one of my most hated athletes in the game today. Punched Mark Scheifele, sucker punched him last night while he was tied up with the official, and it just had me thinking, like, who are the biggest villains that we've experienced in the Mountain West? We'll get to that. What I wanted to lead with, though, is Nique Clifford, and we've talked about him a lot. Obviously, of late, we're going to talk about him a lot as we get up to the draft here. We're going to get some differing perspectives from NBA draft experts, other, local media members. We had Tyler King on Wednesday. He was great. Highly recommend you go check out that discussion. If you missed it, check out his podcast as well. Does a great job covering CSU. Also covers CU, the Nuggets, the guys all over the place. But one of the things that we really focused on was the fact that Nique should, assuming he doesn't end up being a lottery pick, which I do think he has an outside chance to be, maybe not top 10, but that 11 to 14 range. I could certainly see a team falling in love with them in this pre-draft process and being willing to invest that early of a pick in him. And I think a large part of that has to do with how Nique Clifford can immediately come into a good team and impact winning. He's a guy who can, fill a role and do it well, stretch the floor. He can be a rim runner for you. He's a serious athlete. He's a guy that's going to be impactful on the glass. Defensively, I think he's going to be fine. Obviously, you're going to be guarding much more explosive and versatile athletes in the NBA than you were in the Mountain West, but he's held his own. When I think back to some of those matchups against like Virginia and Texas and some of the bigger programs, I don't think he's had anything to worry about there. I just feel like Nique, a lot like Christian Braun on the Nuggets or Julian Strawther, who just had the best game of his young career last night in the Nuggets win, forcing Game 7. Really excited for it. Talk about an electric performance. But I just feel like a lot like those two guys, Nique is somebody who, maybe he's not going to go top 10 because of his age. It's kind of a funny process, the way the draft lottery works. Everybody is trying to hit it big. They're trying to land a Cooper flag. And the reality is that so many of these players that end up going in the top 10 end up flaming out because they aren't as refined as Cooper Flag. Maybe they're 19 and can jump through the roof and they pass the eye test physically and they've got all these traits, and these teams tell themselves, Well, if we can just refine him, if we can hone it in, you can't teach that type of athleticism. You can teach people how to refine their game, how to, be more skilled. That can just come with work in the gym. You can't teach athleticism. And I understand that. I get why the teams do what they do, because who knows, how many opportunities you're going to have to, get a lottery pick or something like that. But I mean, I do feel like some of these teams end up staying bad year after year because instead of just trusting their eyes and taking a winning player who's going to come in day one and make an impact for you. And no, he's not going to be LeBron James. He's not going to come in and be the face of the franchise, completely turn everything around overnight individually. But you can bring someone in like a Christian Braun, like a Julian Strawther, like a Nique Clifford, who is just experienced, has played on good winning basketball programs, has, played a lot of minutes in big games and proven that they're ready for the moment. And I don't know, I guess I just feel like teams at times kind of overthink it, and essentially out of greediness, out of desperately trying to, land a franchise player, trying to get a Cooper Flag type guy. So many players that frankly have no business doing so other than their athleticism end up going, top 15. And guys like Christian Braun, who is, the number 21 pick in 2022, or Julian Strawther, who's the 29th pick in 2023, they're sitting there staring you in the face. And it just cracks me up, because anybody that would have watched these guys closely, and I'm particularly biased when it comes to these three individuals, Nique obviously being a Ram, but I've got a soft spot for Kansas. I always have. I've got a lot of family out there. Grew up, watching a lot of Jayhawk basketball. So I knew what Christian Braun was coming into the NBA. I watch Gonzaga a ton. They're one of my favorite programs in the country. I was fortunate to watch Julian Strawther live in the NCAA tournament, and you could tell he's built for this. He's a big game hunter. When the lights get brighter, he's him. He's that type of guy. And maybe he doesn't overwhelm you in terms of the measurables or size or explosiveness or anything like that, but you want to know what he can do? That dude can hoop. He can knock down shots. He can make an impact for you. And no, he's not going to carry your franchise, but he doesn't have to. And that's the benefit of being one of these guys that doesn't land on one of these trash organizations that's perennially picking in the top 10 and constantly trying to tell themselves this is the lottery ticket that's going to get us out of this mess that we've been in. They can just come in and lean on what they do best. And the things that Nique does well are things that winning teams can never have enough of. 3-point shooting, rebounding, defensive versatility, the ability to switch through multiple positions. And, guards and forwards, you're probably not going to put him on a 5 in the NBA. Like at times he might have, been matched up on, a smaller 5 on like a San Jose State or something like that, depending on what type of lineups CSU were running out there. But I just feel like Nique is one of those guys who, if a team doesn't overthink it, and I imagine some of these good teams that have a lot of picks, Minnesota, Oklahoma City, even Brooklyn's got a lot of picks. Like I don't think that they're going to miss out on a guy like Nique if he's sitting there. I just think he's got a really good opportunity to go into a good competitive team and make an impact right away. And I'm really excited for his future. Tyler said it on the show Wednesday, whatever it was. He felt like, even back when he was covering the Buffs 3 years ago, Nique had the highest NBA ceiling out of, Tristan da Silva and KJ Simpson and some of those other terrific players that were, in the program at the time. And I think you can say the same thing with CSU. Obviously, the legacy and the status of Isaiah Stevens, of David Roddy, those guys are pretty unique. Really, with Nique being a multi-year guy, I think he's arguably about on par with Roddy in terms of legacy. I know he didn't start as a Ram. I know he wasn't the conference player of the year or anything like that, but he's going to be a top 20 pick, and he was the face of this team and a major part of 2 NCAA tournament teams and multiple NCAA tournament wins, which, not really anybody else in program history is able to say that. I just think he's a guy that's really developed and matured so well in recent years. And now going into the league, he's just in a perfect position to succeed. And I'm really excited to see how this all plays out. Like I do hope that he lands, even if it's against, a Nuggets division rival. Like he would be such a good fit in Minnesota. He would be such a good fit with the Thunder. I would hate it as a Nuggets guy. I would absolutely hate it. But I just want these guys to land in spots where they're going to have a chance to succeed. I honestly think the Nuggets could use a guy like Nique Clifford, but they unfortunately don't have any draft capital. Maybe they'll end up making a move or something like that, getting a couple of picks, and I guess that could change the conversation. But I don't know. I just think there's something about Nique Clifford that is really exciting if you're a savvy basketball mind and understand all of the unique things that he can do out there. And the athleticism was always going to translate, but his growth as a playmaker, as a passer, his handle is much improved. His shot making has just become so consistent these last couple of years. He's a guy who had moments in the past. It was the consistency he needed to show, and he was able to do that. And it's just fun to watch. He's a fun basketball player because he can do some pretty incredible things athletically, but he has the right mindset. He's going to make the right play. He's not going to force things. He's not going to try and play hero ball and, heat check a bunch of threes or anything like that. He's going to stick to his role. And I think he's going to be really successful doing so. The other thought I had last night, just kind of comparing, a Nique Clifford to a Christian Braun, comparing a CSU basketball to the Nuggets. I think one of the fun things about, if you are a local basketball fan, is these teams, because of the selflessness of their stars, because guys like Nique Clifford were such team-oriented individuals, Isaiah Stevens obviously before that as well, very similar to like what we see with the Nuggets, obviously, because of that mentality that, kind of stems from the top down from having a guy like Nikola Jokic. But these teams are fun to watch because they play the game the right way. They always make the right pass. They share the basketball. They cut. They set screens. It's not, one guy. And it's fun to watch somebody, turn into just an ISO killer like, Kobe back in the day. There's a million examples. Even like a Gian Clavel, on CSU. Like it's fun when you have a guy like that who just can basically play 1-on-5 and hit a bunch of circus shots. But it's really hard to have sustained success that way. And I think one of the biggest things that's allowed CSU and the Nuggets to be consistently competitive, despite, not always having the same depth as some of these other teams out there, is the way they share the ball. And, I see the youngins always, post online, like playing ethical basketball. The Nuggets, the Rams, they play ethical basketball. And I think that background that Nique has is really going to it's really going to serve him well going into, the next level there. Shout out to our guy Josh in the Toyota chat. He says if Nique could go to San Antonio instead of Oklahoma City, that'd be great. I too would enjoy that. I have let go of some of the animosity that I held towards the Spurs as a kid, respected their greatness, pissed a lot of basketball fans off over the years by saying Tim Duncan's a better all-time player than Kobe Bryant. Stand by that take. But they just bullied the Nuggets when I was a kid. They eliminated Denver in the Melo era in the playoffs like 2 or 3 times. So I hated San Antonio growing up. I've grown to appreciate them as a, basketball connoisseur the older that I've gotten. It would be pretty cool to see Nique Clifford in a franchise like San Antonio, which has had quite a bit of stability over the last 30 plus years. Obviously, they've got Victor Wembanyama, so the future is pretty bright there. I mean, Castle and some of those other young guys in the rotation are pretty exciting as well. I think that'd be a nice fit for him too. I still feel like the Spurs lack a true point guard, so I don't love that. I do think Nique's going to need to be somebody that's, kind of set up for some catch and shoot opportunities. I do think he can create his own shot. I don't think that's what, NBA teams are going to be asking him to do very consistently. Putting a bow just kind of on this topic, we are going to just give out some of the, most clutch individuals we've seen come through, Fort Collins over the last 20 years. And we're going to pivot. We're going to talk some villains. Let's take a quick break though. Let's shout out a couple of our awesome partners. Whether on the road, at home, or somewhere in between, First Bank makes banking easy, convenient, and secure. Their mobile banking app allows you to check balances, pay friends, and manage your money anytime, anywhere. Here's the best part. Open a new First Bank checking account today. You can earn $300. First Bank is all about helping you stay on track. Their tools make it simple to stay in control of your finances without the hassle, no matter where life takes you. First Bank gives you the freedom to bank how and when works best for you. So if you're ready for better banking and for a chance to learn a little extra, head to efirstbank.com/bonus. That's efirstbank.com/bonus to open your account. Bank how you want, when you want with First Bank. Certain restrictions and requirements apply. Member FDIC. I also would like to shout out Lucy Nicotine. Lucy Nicotine, 100% pure nicotine, always tobacco free. They make a great product. This is one I very much can personally endorse. The Lucy Mango is chef's kiss. I love it. Cinnamon solid. You can't go wrong with, mint or something basic like that as well. Although not a wintergreen kind of guy. That gives me some war flashbacks to like being 14 years old and trying to impress the varsity baseball players and just getting so sick off chew. I think every high school baseball player probably goes through that at some point, trying to look cool, end up looking like a fool. You don't have to, though, with Lucy. The pouches are really smooth, and what's really cool is the Lucy breakers. They offer a little bit of extra hydration, so from a textural standpoint, they stay nice and refreshing. Level up your nicotine routine with Lucy. Go to lucy.co/DNVR. Use the promo code DNVR to get 20% off your first order. Lucy has a 30-day refund policy if you change your mind. Again, that's lucy.co. Use the code DNVR to get 20% off. Here comes the fine print. Lucy products are only for adults of legal age. Every order is age verified. Warning, this product contains nicotine, and nicotine is an addictive chemical. All right, let's put a bow on this, and then let's talk villains, which was inspired by the great Jamie Benn, the infamous Jamie Benn, I guess is how I should phrase it. I don't think he's so great. Let's talk the most clutch CSU Rams over the last 20 years. This was inspired by just, obviously Jokic and Murray in the big moments have been incredible. Strawther was awesome last night, but I was just thinking about how when the lights are brightest, when your season's on the line, time and time again, Jokic and Murray have been so clutch. Like their averages go up in game 5, game 6, game 7 types of scenarios. And that's not a common thing, like having been on the Avalanche pod a lot more frequently of late. And if you're a hockey fan, maybe give that a listen here at some point. But like, I think to like an Austin Matthews or a Mitch Marner on the Toronto Maple Leafs, who are under pretty intense scrutiny right now because they're considered guys that are, regular season stars that love to rack up the big stats in random February games and whatnot. But when it's time to, carry your team in the postseason and step up and make a play, those guys haven't been able to do it. And there's been some criticisms of Nathan MacKinnon on the Avs for similar things. He hasn't historically been great in elimination games. I actually thought he played pretty well in game 7 against the Dallas Stars, but I don't need to go off too far on a tangent here. I think you guys get the point. Like, who are the guys that when the lights get brighter, they rise to the occasion? Somebody like a Tom Brady, somebody who is clutch. And these are kind of the names that I came up with. I'd love to hear some suggestions in the Toyota chat if you have any. But sticking on the basketball side, just because we're right there, some guys that immediately come to mind. Isaiah Stevens. I mean, how many game winners did he hit in 5 years, like with the Rams? And it was something he showed really early on in his career with the game winners. I think it was Tulsa and like double overtime at one point. Then, he hit the game winner against Nevada, I believe, as a sophomore, which was an epic moment. The UNLV game where he went for 35 or whatever it was and hit about 4 circus threes to even keep CSU in the game. I mean, when the crunch time was here, when it was winning time, as they love to say, Isaiah Stevens was here for the moment. And that guy, time and time again, stepped up, delivered for the Rams. I mean, I think you have to put Nique Clifford in that conversation, particularly with what he did down the stretch and back-to-back springs. He was, the numbers aren't like insane in terms of points off the top of my head, but he was really big in a couple of those regular season games to finish last season or 2 seasons ago. He was awesome. If you remember, they had to beat a ranked Nevada team to basically get into the NCAA tournament. And Nique was huge in that game, had a bunch of blocks, just made an impact all over the floor. And then obviously this year, what he was able to do to carry CSU through the Mountain West into the NCAA tournament, he was so incredible over that final like 15 games or whatever it was, dropping 36 or whatever he had against Boise State on the road. I mean, talk about clutch. Like that's the epitome of a guy who's here for the moment. I mean, David Roddy was huge. I mean, think about him balling out against Creighton. He had a bunch of games. He had a massive game against New Mexico in there. Just when the lights were bright, those guys were here for it. And those kind of guys are rare. Going back a little bit further, you know, Gian Clavel was unreal. Like that 2017 season was such an emotional roller coaster. And the funny thing is most of the game winners were like actually hit by other guys. Gian hit the game winner in Viejas, and what's still, I think, the most impressive individual performance I've ever seen from a CSU Ram. What he did on that night was just insane. But, you know, like I think Amagbo hit the game winner against San Diego State, I believe, and Prentice Nixon, I think, hit the game winner against Wyoming. The fans stormed the court for both, but Gian Clavel was one of those dudes that just constantly, when it seemed like CSU was down and out, would hit 2 circus threes, and all of a sudden the Rams were right back in it. Taylor in the Toyota chat says Joe Palmer versus CU and Moby. Clutch moment. I don't know if I can put Joe Palmer in the same category as some of these other guys in terms of consistency. But Joe Palmer in that CU game was awesome. That's kind of where the legacy began with him, right? I mean, I think you got to shout out Jalen Lake. We were talking about some other Rams, but I mean, Jalen Lake, it sucks, you know, how the game finished, but that shot against Maryland should have been one of the biggest shots in CSU history. He's hit, you know, multiple game winners, hit a game winner against Nevada, hit a game winner against Boise State, another guy who was here for the moment. Dorian Green, Wes Eichmeyer back in the day, the Tim Miles era. Pierce Hornung was like a different type of clutch. He's not the guy that's going to be knocking down the big shots or making the Sports Center highlight plays or anything like that. But I do feel like in a really good Mountain West too, back in the day, you know, you'd be going up against like a ranked San Diego State or a New Mexico who had just a massive size and athleticism advantage in the matchup. But for whatever reason, it was just pure effort mostly and positioning and understanding of rebounding. But he'd be good for like 6 offensive rebounds, a couple of putbacks, would just absolutely come up with the loudest plays. And like, it wasn't the flashiest, it wasn't the sexiest. It was a different type of clutch than these other guys that we're talking about. But he was so big in a couple of those, you know, massively important wins leading up to back-to-back NCAA tournament appearances. You know, Colton Iverson, I would put in that conversation as well, but Hornung and like Green and Eichmeyer are kind of guys that I think about like when the Rams were down and out and just constantly being able to step up and deliver on the football side of things. I mean, if we're talking about just a clutch moment, obviously the Holy Holker, Braden Fowler-Nicolosi to burst Torrey Horton up the seam and then Holker for the game winner. That was big. He had some big throws in that Middle Tennessee State win as well. But in the grand scheme of things, I think you look at like a Garrett Grayson and Rashard Higgins. Grayson was so clutch, so consistently in that 2014 season. I mean, torch CU early on in the year. Then they go out on the road and, you know, he converts on 4th down, hits Charles Lovett in the back of the end zone for that Boston College upset. Admittedly, in hindsight and in the moment, that was a big win. It was big for the program. It sparked, you know, I really do think it gave a belief to that team that they could do something special and really be different. Now in hindsight, given what we know about Steve Addazio, it takes a little bit of the luster out of the victory. But Grayson was so clutch that season. Boston College, homecoming, against Utah State. The dude was just money. Like when you needed somebody to move the sticks, when you had to go down and get a score, Grayson was the guy. And oftentimes the man catching it on the other end was Rashard Higgins, who, a lot like Torrey Horton to set up the Holy Holker. A lot of people forget that Rashard to set up Jared Roberts' game winner against Utah State on homecoming before the students stormed and all that. It was basically a play where Garrett just throws it up and it's like, fuck it, Rashard's down there somewhere. And he managed to haul it in. Shaq Barrett, I mean, how could you not point to Shaq Barrett? The New Mexico Bowl, individually, what he did, strips, get in the strip, and then they say he's down. So what does Shaq do? Just wills his way to another strip, gets the ball back. I mean, that was one of the craziest stretches, individual performances that I can remember. Capri Bibbs was massive in that game as well. But I don't know, Gartrell Johnson was a guy, in that 2008 season, he torched Fresno State in the New Mexico Bowl, but he had some really big moments along the way, even against like a BYU, that 2008 loss to BYU where Joey Porter, chest bumps Gartrell in the end zone. If you're a youngin' and you're listening to this, I know this is all going over your head, but Google it. Corey Sperry was big. David Anderson, I've talked about that in the past. Like David Anderson, in my opinion, is one of the most underrated football players in Mountain West history. I think he has a legitimate argument as the greatest wide receiver in CSU football history, even today. And I'd probably give it to Rashard. I think Torrey is in the conversation. Preston Gallup, all those guys were great. David Anderson for 3 straight years. Like if you he just time and time again, 100 plus yards, 2 touchdowns against CU, against Air Force, against Wyoming. When it was a rivalry game, DA was always up for it. And I just can't help but think, like, what if you put a receiver of his caliber, somebody who's always open, he's an underrated athlete, great hands, deceptively strong. Like, what if you had put him in a pro-style passing offense with a legitimate, pro-style quarterback like Garrett Grayson or, even a Moses Moreno? We all love BVP, but, he wasn't the purest of pocket passers. He wasn't, he wasn't going to rip you apart with his arms most nights. It was about his athleticism, his attitude more than anything. I think if you put Anderson in, a modern passing offense with a legitimate, a Garrett Grayson, something like that, even Braden Fowler-Nicolosi, I think he'd tear it up. And I just think people don't really understand how good he truly was there for a couple of years. We're looking at coaches from the clutch standpoint, Jim McElwain, Nico Medved. I think those would be the obvious choices. Obviously, Sonny Lubick, if we're going historical, but I was kind of fixating here on the last 20 years just to keep it simple. But I mean, Sonny's the clutchest coach that's ever been. Tom Hilbert on the volleyball side, another guy who has just so many big wins. When they were playing the Michigans, the North Carolinas, the Floridas of the world, it was nothing for those programs. And same deal with Sonny. Like, lights got brighter. We're going to the preseason #1 team in '94. Screw it. Let's just hand, the Desert Swarm their biggest loss of the season. Dude beat all kinds of teams. Obviously a lot of big wins over CU. But I don't know. I know this is a random off-season, subject, kind of classic off-season content, but I thought it was fun to kind of reminisce on some of the more clutch individuals. If I missed anybody, you can politely tweet at me, tell me, who I've missed, or, doesn't have to be polite either. I guess most of the interactions on there aren't. All right, let's keep it rolling here. Let's get into the villains, then we'll talk about CSU football, adding some serious beef to the defensive line. Real quick, though, we do need to take one last break and shout out a couple of our final partners here. Mando is a men's deodorant brand that's hyper-focused on keeping every aspect of a man's body smelling fresh and clean. And when they say everything, they mean everything. This isn't your father's deodorant, just the standard, probably shouldn't say a brand, but, standard underarm deodorant that you're used to seeing, all the brands from over the years. This is deodorant for your entire body, your pits, but also your balls, your butt, your grundle, your belly button, all your stank zones. Mando is here to help you keep that at bay. It's stinky season, y'all. I know some people think they don't stink. I promise you, you do. It's human nature. If it's the middle of summer, you need that deodorant. You might even want to double up on it. They've got great scents geared towards men: bourbon leather, clover woods, Mount Fuji, pro sport. And what's cool is you can trust it because this was created by a doctor who saw firsthand the way that BO was being mistreated, misdiagnosed. The Mando men's starter pack, it's perfect way for new customers. It comes with solid stick deodorant, cream tube deodorant, 2 free products of your choice, as well as free shipping. And a special offer for our listeners: new customers can get $5 off that starter pack. All they got to do is use our exclusive code. That's DNVR at shopmando.com. That's SHOPMANDO.com. Equates over to 40% off your starter pack. Please support our show. Tell them we sent you. Smell fresher, stay drier. Boost your confidence from head to toe with Mando. I also want to talk to you guys about Toyota. Trucks have always been a part of Toyota's DNA. For generations, Toyota's built durable legends destined for greatness and perfect for Colorado. Whether you're conquering off-road trails or hauling the weight of the world, there's a Toyota truck that's just right for you, like the all-new Tacoma. You can also check out the epic Land Cruiser. Toyota's got 17 models with available all-wheel drive or four-wheel drive, like the Epic 4Runner. They also offer more low and zero-emission vehicles combined than any other automaker to give customers numerous choices to reduce that carbon footprint. 16 hybrid vehicles to choose from, like the Tundra iForce Max hybrid truck. Not to be outdone, though, Toyota SUVs take command on the road and on the trails, so you can explore the road less traveled without sacrificing smooth city rides in SUVs like the RAV4 and Grand Highlander. Toyota is a proud partner of CSU Athletics and the official vehicle of DNVR. Toyota, let's go places. All right. Biggest villains in Mountain West history. This is a very open-ended topic. As I said earlier, it's from a CSU perspective. I have a CSU slant because my dad went to CSU. Most of my family went to CSU. Grew up bleeding green and gold. Was really never going to go anywhere else. So this is from our perspective. You know, like, I wouldn't have I don't know. I was trying to think of like who could be a villain from CSU side, and I'm sure there have been a few that I'm overlooking. Trey McBride, honestly, he was the guy. If he wasn't on your team, you appreciated his talent, but probably hated playing against him. One, because he was so good, but also two, because he was the type of tight end that, you know, is willing to maybe go a little bit past the line. I don't think he was a dirty player or anything like that. I just think he played with an edge, and I think he liked to set the tone. And I think occasionally he got some unsportsmanlikes for it, but that was something you were willing to live with as a coach, because you sure as hell would rather have that guy on your side. But I'm sure, you know, from a Wyoming perspective or something like that, he'd be in that conversation. But I think if we're talking the whole history of the Mountain West, the biggest villain is just BYU as a whole. All things BYU. Their fans are obnoxious. Like, they're intense, they're passionate. Don't get me wrong. Like, I respect the passion, but they are some of the meanest, most judgmental, you know, fans I've ever experienced. And to this day, I don't know if I've ever seen, well, I'm not going to get into the CSU stuff, but I will say, like, they were about as universally hated as a school as I can remember. Wyoming has beef with BYU. CSU has beef with BYU. Utah hates BYU. Everybody hated BYU. And part of it, to be fair, was because they were dominant. They won a lot in everything. They were a great football program. They were a great basketball program. They still have a lot of success in both of those, but I'm talking about the Mountain West era. Obviously, individually, they've had guys in both programs that, you know, people just couldn't stand. For me, the easy one is Jimmer Fredette. He was one like a Trey McBride. You understood just how unique and special he was. And honestly, like, I kind of liked it. I don't know. I think you have to put him in the conversation, because I think universally he was somebody that was very frustrating for Mountain West fans. And part of that was because he was hitting logo threes before that was kind of a thing. He was a trash talker. I mean, he was the perfect embodiment of a BYU star athlete. Like, the clean cut, you know, smirk, would fit in, I don't know, like every sitcom scenario where it's like the evil rich kid at the country club. Like I feel like he would fit in that friend group, and that's judging based off of looks, admittedly. But he had that like preppy guy, punchable face, and on top of that, he's out there raining threes in your face. He's talking trash. He was unstoppable, man. He was incredible, and he was a lot of fun to watch. But he's definitely, I think, football or basketball, one of the biggest villains in Mountain West history. But that's just like BYU was just so unlikable for so long. Even the way they left. Like, I think that most Mountain West fans have more animosity towards BYU than they do Utah or TCU. Part of that because of the way that BYU carried themselves throughout their entire time in the Mountain West, but also like even the way that they left. TCU secured an invite to the Big 12. Yes, it stunk to lose them, especially when they did. Like that's the peak of TCU football under Gary Patterson. They're going to the Rose Bowl. They're playing Wisconsin. But you got it. We all would have left for the Big 12 if we were in their spot. You couldn't really fault Utah for going to the Pac-12 either. Like that's a tremendous opportunity, particularly back then, before, USC and UCLA were no longer in the mix. Like I think everybody understood it with those two schools being willing to leave for, brighter pastures or whatever. But BYU left to be independent. They were so up their own ass that like they couldn't even associate with the Mountain West anymore. And even though the Pac-12 didn't want them, and at the time the Big 12 didn't want them, the Big 12 didn't want them until they lost Texas and Oklahoma and ran out of, options. Like they still had the gall to go independent, and it didn't end up being like a totally disastrous scenario in the end, but I think they would have been just as fine, if not better off, had they just stayed in the Mountain West. Certainly from a basketball standpoint, I think being with the Mountain West instead of like they were in like the Big West for a while and the WCC, like they were in like a couple of different leagues throughout that weird stretch. There's something about BYU that rubs me the wrong way to this day. Brett says Keith Van Horn from Utah back in the WAC days. I'm sure there's a lot of names we could throw back to the WAC if we start going, way, way back. I'm about a couple of weeks from turning 30. So, like I don't really have a ton of perspective other than having read some of the history, but I know there's been quite a few Utah guys that I think you could throw in the mix, and one that comes to mind, Urban Meyer / Kyle Whittingham. I think it was kind of I don't know, like they were the dark side, and like the Emperor passed away, he left for Florida, but you get what I mean. But then the son was just as bad as him. Those guys are just so unlikable. Tremendously successful football coaches, and Whittingham, at least to his credit, has not made a total ass of himself outside of the football world like old Urban Meyer has to this point. But Utah was not exactly popular, in the early 2000s. And again, a lot of that had to do with how good they were, football and basketball. They're Andrew Bogut and hoops, and Alex Smith on the football side. They had some really good players come through those programs, and they kicked the shit out of a lot of Mountain West teams pretty consistently. But what made BYU and Utah so hateable, in my opinion, was just kind of the holier than thou mentality that those fan bases had, and the interactions would just be so nasty. Like that'd be the funny thing. Like they may not cuss at you, but they would be like classist and just the biggest pricks you've ever interacted with. And no offense to anybody that has friends or family in Utah. I mean this all in good fun. Like in the spirit of rivalry, I've met a ton of tremendous people that are Utah and BYU fans. We're obviously overgeneralizing. When I talk about Wyoming fans, being quote unquote obnoxious rednecks, I don't mean they're all bad people or anything like that. I've got a lot of Wyoming fans or friends that are fans, and we've had some of them on the show, Cody Tucker and some of those guys. There are good Utah and BYU fans. But as a whole, man, those were very, very unlikable fan bases. Could you say Craig Thompson? I have pointed out that I think occasionally Craig takes too much of the blame for some of the shortcomings with the Mountain West in terms of realignment and expansion moves. I do think not being able to land Gonzaga and Wichita State at one point was a pretty big miss on his part. I don't think he gets enough credit for saving the league once, TCU and Utah and BYU left. You can also blame him for leaving, for those schools leaving. But I think the way that he pivoted and was able to go out and get programs at the time that were very good. I mean, the WAC was really fun there in 2009 to 2010, 2008, that mid 2000s range. Kaepernick at Nevada, Boise State with Kellen Moore and some of those guys. Like those were good programs that they added, and obviously they've all been really good fits. Boise State, Utah State, Fresno State, Nevada. There's the lower you get down the list, the San Jose States, the Hawaiis, the Nevadas of the world, a little less intriguing, although they do have value on the basketball side. But I think Craig Thompson, if you were to poll Mountain West fans and just ask them, like, who are guys that you hate from the league's history, he would probably be a pretty common answer. And I think, again, some of the criticism that he takes is maybe a little bit unfair, but also I think he is responsible with the Mountain West having kind of a complacent mindset, at least after they added those teams in 2011 or whatever it was. They didn't really do anything to fortify their position following that. And I do think that's what allowed a conference like the American to rise to prominence. And while I did roll my eyes when the AAC was trying to do the whole Power 6 branding back when we still had 5 power conferences, now it's the P4. But when they were branding themselves as, the P6, it was super corny. They also did some things that clearly worked. Like some of that probably is dictated by the media markets in their conference. I understand South Florida and some Texas schools and Memphis and whatnot. Just having schools in the Eastern Conference, that's going to get them some dollars that, maybe you don't have access to as a West Coast based league. But I just don't feel like he did a ton to improve the league's position during a time where it was kind of needed. The waters were pretty turbulent. The writing was on the wall. You needed to be proactive and not reactive. And I do feel like while, again, adding Boise State, Fresno, some of those schools to save the league was massive, and he deserves a ton of praise for that. At the same time, like, you're kind of the reason that some of those big schools left in the first place, and then you didn't really do anything to try and further, increase visibility and raise the prominence of the league by going out and, adding Gonzaga or whatever it was. I just felt like they got kind of complacent there. In the Twitter chat here, Leon Rice and Troy Calhoun, great answers. I have a lot of respect for both of them because they're loyal. I think both of those guys could have, maybe you're not going to get an Alabama football gig if you're Troy Calhoun, but could he have gotten a low-end P4 job at some point? Probably. Could Leon Rice have, left for, I don't know, I feel like staying in the Pacific Northwest makes sense, but could he have left for a Washington State, somewhere that was maybe slightly a step up in terms of just the resources you're going to have, general perception nationally, probably good, successful coaches. But man, those are coaches that have rubbed a lot of fan bases the wrong way over the years. I guess I'll just say that. I really do think Troy Calhoun might be the most underrated football coach in the country. So I'm trying to say this with respect while recognizing that he can be prickly, I guess would be the way I would phrase it. I don't think Troy Calhoun and I would have a great time having a couple beers watching a game in the bar. I'll just put it that way. Maybe I'm wrong. I've actually heard from some older writers that when you get him in those off the record situations, which I don't think there are a lot of because access to Air Force is pretty restricted, but when you can get him in those scenarios, he's comes off very likable. Way back in the day, they used to do these Rocky Mountain luncheons at the Blake Street Tavern where they would have all the football coaches from around the state. There were a couple times I interacted with him down there and did actually find him to be pretty pleasant. He gave me some decent answers, but he's one of those guys that part of it's from the success too, but man, does he get under your skin? I'm probably going longer on this topic than I needed to, but it's fun. Who cares? It's the off season. We mentioned Jimmer Fredette. The Martin twins come to mind, from that Musselman era of basketball. They're very talented, but those are the kind of guys that are going to knock a shot, turn around and, do some gesture to the to the crowd, very similar to like Jalen House on New Mexico a couple years ago. The type of player you'd love and adore if he plays for you, but absolutely despise him because he's a pest. He gets under your skin and he's good. Like, obviously, you have to be good. If all you do is run your mouth, but you're not out there making plays, I think it's going to fall on deaf ears because who cares? It cuts deep with people like Jalen House, like Jimmer Fredette, because like they're talking shit, but they're making plays. Like Jalen House is going to draw 3 charges, get a couple of steals, some transition hoops, and then he's going to do it. Jimmer's going to knock down a couple of threes, and then he's going to talk trash. You got to have the substance to back it up. And this is one that's definitely from a CSU perspective, but like Josh Adams comes to mind of Wyoming. Dude basically single-handedly kept CSU out of the NCAA tournament in 2015. Colorado kid, got overlooked by Larry Eustachy. He made it his business to bust the Rams every single time that they played, and he did it, man. That dude was a killer for 2 years. The Adams-Nance era of Wyoming basketball was a handful. Gerard Lucas, again, that's very CSU specific. Kendall Williams as well. God, how many threes did he hit in that game back in the day for New Mexico? You could throw a couple of other coaches out there. Chris Peterson, early era Boise State, when they still had that swag, when they still were a top 20 team year in and year out, and they're hanging 70 on everybody week in and week out. I don't think Boise was super popular early on. Larry Eustachy, I had some people tweet that at me. Like, you probably have to throw him in the conversation for obvious reasons, just his general antics and demeanor. If you say that Leon Rice is one of the biggest villains for, whining and whatnot, Larry would definitely fall in that category. I don't think he was very popular with officials. Jim McElwain, honestly, the way that he left was brutal. Him and Florida acted like such tools during that entire process. I've got a lot of love for Mac, as I had a great experience working for the staff under him. I think he did so many people that were very important in his success in Fort Collins. I think he did a lot of those people dirty. I think he very quickly, was feeling himself, and he's a great coach. He's a great offensive mind. Like, I want this to be taken the right way, but Florida, with their AD coming in, they fly in private, basically trying to strong arm CSU. I don't think they thought CSU would put up as much fight and then really hold them to paying the entire buyout the way CSU did. Kudos to Jack Graham for doing so. But to leave the way that he did after having 1 foot out the door, like, the writing was on the wall for the last couple weeks of the regular season. I think it impacted his decision-making in that Air Force loss, which ultimately prevented CSU from playing for a Mountain West championship, which just sucks because that team was good enough to do so. It was a really weird year for the league. Air Force, Boise, CSU all won 10 games. I think Utah State might have been a 10-win team too, all in the same division. But he just had some questionable calls that ended up costing CSU the game. Then he leaves, does the halftime interview in our bowl game where we're just getting embarrassed by Utah because the players had given up on the year. And it sucks that that's how it played out, but that is the truth. A lot of those players were at that point in time looking forward to vacation. And in Vegas, that's easy to do so. I don't think that was the freshest roster that played that matchup. We'll just say it that way. But it stinks that somebody who was as successful as he was went out that way. And that's why I continue to praise Nico Medved. I know that there are some fans that are just going to say, screw him. Same thing. People will never forgive Tim Miles. And I'm not even saying you're necessarily wrong. I'll point out repeatedly that if all Nico wanted to do was get out for a bigger school, he could have done it 15 times over the last 2-3 years. He didn't. Turn down legitimate jobs and power conferences. This was his hometown gig. His parents are there. It's his alma mater. I get it. Like, it's tough to turn down the heart in that scenario. As much as he loves CSU, I genuinely think it was really hard for him to leave CSU, even from Minnesota. But he went out the right way. He went out. Yes, that deal had been done behind the scenes for some time. Like, I think even before the Mountain West tournament, that was a done deal. But it certainly didn't impact the way that they prepared. They played their best ball of the season down the stretch. Like, they went out the right way. He won a Mountain West championship, which is something, nobody had been able to do in, 20 plus years. So I think Nico's somebody that Ram fans should be rooting for. They should be appreciative of what he did for the program, the way that he set the team up and built a foundation of success. And I think there's a great opportunity here for Ali to carry that torch and, keep the ball rolling here. We went so much further on all of those than I anticipated. I guess 50 minutes into the show is a good time to talk about some of these recent commitments for CSU football. We can always talk a little bit more about it next week. But if you missed it, CSU football yesterday, I believe, picked up a commitment from 6'3", 318-pound defensive tackle Alton Tarber, originally out of Deerfield Beach High School in Florida. He was a 3-star prospect in the 2022 cycle, but he was rated a top 100 defensive line prospect that year. Signed with Oklahoma, but he had offers up and down the Big 12 at the SEC, Auburn's, all kinds of programs in the SEC and Big 12. I should have just pulled up the list, but ended up signing with OU over a bunch of significant offers, spent the 2022 season in their program. He did not play football in 2023. I found a social media post where he talked about, taking the year off and getting his mind right. And you can respect a young man for doing so. This past year, he played at Hines Community College, where he had 17 tackles, 1.5 tackles for loss, and half a sack in 8 games. The stats aren't anything crazy. Like, they don't jump off the page or anything like that. But you do got to remember, that's somebody who had not played a ton of football in the 2 years before. Didn't see any game action for the Sooners in 2022. Didn't play in 2023. He's somebody that could potentially come into your program, and it might take some time, for him to get back into playing shape and adjust to the physicality and all of that. But he's somebody who, while the floor is maybe low, like, he's potentially somebody who just comes in and doesn't work out. Like, there's a reason it didn't work out at OU, didn't have crazy production at a community college. I think fans should have somewhat tempered expectations coming into the season in terms of what he's going to be for this team. But the ceiling is theoretically potentially really high. Like, there aren't a lot of 6'3", 320-pound defensive linemen in the Mountain West. The CSU's been able to add 2 of them this cycle. And I've just been really impressed with the work that the staff has done to fill gaps. And I really do feel like having a general manager and having an increased personnel department and recruiting and all that is something that's really paying dividends for CSU. The Rams are doing a good job of recruiting JUCO and going out and getting guys that, have a desire to move up, very similarly to how G5 guys often are, transferring up through the transfer portal. There's an opportunity for CSU, and this isn't anything new. We've talked about this before, but to be a place where guys that star at the D2 level, that are, breakout JUCO players, but are maybe being overlooked because, SEC teams, Big 12 teams that maybe would have taken a chance on somebody like him or even like a Paul Tangelo from St. Francis before, they're concerned about signing other D1 players in the portal. They'll just go and steal Fresno State's defensive lineman or a CSU, defensive end, Wake Forest situation where they go out and just get a couple of our guys when maybe they would have been interested in some of these players that are ultimately ending up at places like CSU, like Boise State, like Utah State. I've noticed in particular all of the Mountain West programs really going JUCO heavy this cycle, which makes sense. It does, just with the way that college football is right now. You got to be willing to take all of the avenues that are available to you. And the one thing that has the potential to benefit CSU, you've got to be able to retain these guys, unlike, the Caleb Goodies and Lewis Browns of the world, Justice Ross Simmons, etc. As I do think it's opened up a world where high school guys, JUCO guys that are flying under the radar are available to CSU, and maybe they wouldn't have been, 10, 15 years ago because Wake Forest or Virginia Tech or whatever would have been taking a chance on them. Kansas State, I remember back in the day was infamous for really going JUCO heavy. But I think it makes sense, especially when you're trying to fill gaps. I got to imagine a lot of these guys, they're not getting crazy NIL right off the bat. I can't speak for them. I don't know exactly what they're getting. I'm sure some of them are getting something, but like, I just think there's levels to this. I think, some of the guys that they brought in, like a Jaquez Evans, for instance, I imagine you're committing more to him off the bat than some of these other guys at this point in the process. Maybe like a Paul Tangelo or a Jeremy Naborn who are committed elsewhere. Like maybe those guys, you're able to sweeten the pie a little bit for them. But I like the work that they've done, particularly on the defensive side of the ball. I think Paul Tangelo can be a day one starter for you at edge rusher. I think he's very, very intriguing. I think Jeremy Naborn outside is somebody that can be like a true outside linebacker for you, but I also think he can potentially fill that edge role as well, where he's just a downhill, pass rusher, 6'3", 220, rangy to sideline, he's got long arms. I think he can be an impactful pass rusher for you and a disruptive run stopper. Mekhi Robinson, we haven't really talked a ton about him, but 6'3", 285 out of San Jose City College. As a redshirt freshman this past year at 55 tackles, 13 tackles for loss, and 6.5 sacks. You love that. They've added some really intriguing pieces here on the defensive side of the ball. I felt like they were pretty thin at outside backer. I felt like they were pretty thin at defensive tackle and defensive line as a whole. Like you liked some of the guys like Lorich and Wakalanji and some of these other guys, Moran, that are in the program. I think they can be solid, but you just needed some more depth there. You needed some more size. And to go out and to get someone with this kind of frame, like you can't coach that. Admittedly, it's somewhat of a gamble as, like, again, there's reasons why these guys have not worked out at their past stops. But if you can add a 6'3", 318-pound defensive tackle with multiple years of eligibility, that's worth the roll of the dice. If you can add a Denius Robinson, who started at Kentucky, didn't play there, but goes to Contra Costa Community College, 6'4", 320 pounds, 30 tackles, 8 TFL, 2 sacks this past season. He's got a little bit more production on paper. I mean, if even one of these guys works out for you, that's a massive win for the program. Even Jaden Cortell, like the DB they brought over from San Diego Mesa, son of Ron Cortell, one of the best corners in CSU history, 5'10", 180, like on paper, you don't love him. When you watch him, I like the way he plays. He's aggressive with the ball. He's got good skills. 54 tackles, 2 interceptions, and a forced fumble this past year. I like the guys that they've brought in. I think they can be impactful for the Rams, especially defensively. Even on offense, like Taj Bullock. This is something that my friend Kevin pointed out when I was talking to him on Twitter the other day. The Rams have been willing to go to some of those gadget plays these past couple of years. You think back to, Torrey Horton's thrown some touchdowns. They've done some trick stuff with Giles Pooler and Dallin Holker. They did some wildcat stuff this past year with Avery Morrow. Taj Bullock's 6'3", 220 pounds. He can really run. I think you can give him those Avery Morrow wildcat plays. I think you can set some things up where you have an opportunity to lean into your creativity. And because he has that quarterback background, you can keep defenses honest. You might pull it and throw deep one of these times. I like the potential here, and I like how purposeful and thoughtful they've been in the portal. Early on in the tenure, you're really just trying to sign bodies. Like you're just trying to get as many guys in the program as you can to give yourself a fighting chance to be competitive. You're to the point now, going into year 4 where you need to be very purposeful and you have to be, recruiting with intent. And I just feel like the staff, very much like an NFL draft standpoint, has just done a good job of being disciplined and addressing the important positions, recruiting the areas you need to fill. Like they've done a good job with the O-line. They've signed young talent and they've been able to develop it. Now you're a little bit less reliant on the portal every single year. And it allows you to, use that money elsewhere. And I'm just excited. I'm cautiously optimistic going into this season. I think there's still a lot of unknown because I think, with this schedule, UTSA, Washington State, they're such coin flips to me. Like you don't really know what you're going to get out of any of those teams as of now. You could see any of them being pretty good. You could also see in it be a optimal time for a matchup, like maybe now's the time you want to play a team like that. we'll see. But I really do feel like the staff's done a great job, and I feel a lot better about the defense because I liked the guys that they brought in that we saw in spring. You just worried about the depth. You worried, if one or two of these guys go down, then where does that leave you? And you feel much, much better about where this roster is at going into the summer than I think you did at the beginning of spring, especially now that they added Isaiah Hankins, the kicker from Baylor, 71% over 4 years, career long of 54. Shocked they ran him off. I'll be very interested to get his perspective on all of that. But Taylor says here before we get out of here, and I guess we're going to overtime. So if you are watching on your TV, just head over to thednvr.com. You can watch the rest of the show there. Shouldn't be too much longer. But Taylor says, coaching aside, does CSU have the players it takes to compete with Boise and UNLV this season? I think so. You've got a third-year starting quarterback. You have a wide receiver core that should be solid. Like, I don't know if you have an all-conference wide receiver, but I think you've got 4 or 5 guys that can be productive for you. I love what they have at tight end and running back. I think those are 2 of the stronger position groups on the team. Cautiously optimistic about the offensive line. I think you can get carried away with spring takeaways, but I think they're in a good spot. I think some guys that they've signed these last couple of cycles in particular are really going to pop this season. Defensively, it's a lot of moving parts. It's a lot of new pieces, new scheme. We'll have to see. And while I do think it's one of those situations where an increase in aggressiveness will result in some bigger plays being made, I think they'll create more turnovers, more tackles for loss, all that. I could also see them being kind of volatile, where it's like 2 or 3 times a game they get a big, pick six, a strip sack, or whatever, but they also get burned for, a 40-yard touchdown or something like that. I could see them being all over the place. Ram Hill says, I feel like UNLV takes a step back this year. I really could see it going a million different ways with UNLV. It's just tough to say. They've had so much turnover, with Barry Odom leaving out. They've brought in a lot of guys that were big names in the recruiting process at one point in their careers. But again, like a lot like the conversation we just had with CSU, there's a reason these guys are transferring, quote unquote, down, from some of these other bigger programs. It didn't work out there. And maybe that's just because there was a ton of depth, but maybe it's also because they don't have the right practice habits, or maybe they just aren't as good as what they were sold out to be coming out of high school. Like, that happens a lot. I think if you base everything off of, well, they signed, 11 former 3-stars or 4-stars or whatever, you can come to some false conclusions without having, the appropriate, information to do so. But yeah, random episode all over the place, but I appreciate everybody for rocking with us today. Shout out to everybody in Ram Nation. You make all this possible. I couldn't do it without you. Much love to Alyssa, our phenomenal producer behind the scenes, making this all happen. Hope everybody's able to enjoy their weekend. Go Nuggets, y'all. Much love. Always proud to be. Peace.
We all silly like the mayor.